All right, good morning. If you're just joining us, we are jumping straight into press review. We're taking a look at some of the top stories making headlines on our local dailies. And I have none other than Evans Wera, who is an assistant the assistant relationship manager at Emirates International Group. Evans, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So before we even jump into this, I've got to ask you, because what was your biggest story for you throughout this week that stood out for you?
Okay, first of all, thanks for having me this day. For me, the biggest story was the presidential speech on the state of the nation. Yes.
Okay.
To me, he performed well. I'll give him 60%. But he failed to touch on issues that touch directly on the local Mananchi.
Okay.
Like today, you can see we have floods, where you see almost over 100 people dead. We have a lot of schools flooded. And then from these floods, the waterborne diseases are likely to come up.
Right.
And so he failed to touch on that one. And again, on corruption, he just told us of how families of people involved in corruption should be ashamed. And if you look here, we're going to look at it. You see a lot of wastages.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
All right. So Evans had made a key point, because on our standard, the Saturday Standard newspaper this morning, our biggest story is presidency blew about 2.5 billion Kenyan shillings in about 6 months. That's about 2.5 billion Kenyan shillings. This is what happened, and I quote, "In the half year of December 2017, as the country was immersed in heated electioneering period, Uhuru and Ruto's spending on domestic travel and hospitality, among others, shot up as that of foreign trips declined." So details on that are on page 4. But let's just shed a bit of more light in regards to sharing a few of the numbers. Now, about 44 million Kenyan shillings, that's the amount that was spent on foreign travels alone. This was 3 times lower than in the similar year of 2016. But get this, about 433 million Kenyan shillings was spent on expenditure on domestic travel alone. 433 million Kenyan shillings. This was more than double in the spending of the half year to December 2016. And of course, there are more numbers there that are highlighting that 2.5 billion Kenyan shillings. 45.6 million Kenyan shillings was spent on rentals and rates on building offices here in Kenya. And as you've seen, there's also the issue with the building offices, or rather buying an office space all the way in Uganda, Kampala, for about 600 million Kenyan shillings, when the same space was being given for less at about 200 million Kenyan shillings. 74.2 million Kenyan shillings is the amount that was spent on motor vehicles maintenance alone in the half year of December 2017. Evans, what are your thoughts, or what are your regards when you hear these numbers? 2.5 billion in just about 6 months.
You see, the painful part of it all is that these are public funds.
Right.
And if you look at the time frame within which this money was spent, it was during the election time. And during that time, you'll find that a lot of people want to create cash cows, where they can now maximally acquire money from the public purse. If you look at money spent on maintenance of vehicles,
right,
and expenditure on printing and advertising, I mean, this is wastage. This money could have been spent on helping Kenyans who are dying of hunger. But you see,
with the drought that we've been facing,
the drought that we have been facing,
right,
and we'll find very soon we'll not be having maize for our people, and that's hunger. So to me, this is wastage. And just to go back to what we said when we began, the president spoke of corruption. I think this is where it starts.
Right, in his own back door.
In his own back. You see, if we can be able to manage these wastages, I think, and this one is happening within the presidency. So when he comes and tell us that we should be ashamed of our families or people, it should be about being ashamed of our families.
Right.
Since if my father involves himself in corruption, I should be the one carrying that pain. She should be the one. She should be jailed. So such, I think, and I find I like the control of the budget, this report. I think something must be done when it comes to finding ways of curbing such instances in future.
Right. Of course, like you said in the State of a Nation address, he had addressed the issue, putting judiciary on the spotlight and tell them to do a bit more. So details on that specific story, our top story of the presidency, blowing about 2.5 billion in 6 months, can be found on page 4. And get this, the president's spending on domestic travel alone rose by 138%, starting at about 432.5 million Kenyan shillings in the first half of the 2017-2018 as Uhuru and Ruto traversed the country. All right, so details on that story and how that 2.5 billion was blown is on page 4, details of that as well. All right, let's continue looking at the Standard this morning. Another story that caught my attention was Sarit Center yesterday, with the issue, the fire that broke out. And what happened is that we sort of saw the same incidents. This is on page 8 of the Standard newspaper. We saw sort of the same incident with what happened in Kijiji, where fire trucks did not have enough water. Evans, what are your thoughts on how Kenya responds to evacuation and emergency?
I think it's very unfair. It's very unfair. What I know is that all of us are equal before God.
Right.
And if you see what happened at Langata when there was a fire outbreak, it took a lot of time for the firefighters to go. And when they went there, I mean, how do you go to fight fire and yet you don't have water? But here, you'll see this water was put out within a short time. That shows as how, let's say, those people in authority view some of Kenyans as being lesser children of God, which is very unfair. And I think the concerned authorities should also look into this one, because this one now sends a very bad message to the local mwananchi. And to make it worse, the one in Langata, it attacked people, the residents where people live.
And their property.
And this one, I want to believe this is a Sarit Center where we have businesses. This one shows you how people view life compared to property.
Right.
I think life is more sacred. Yes.
Let's go to page 10. Still on the Saturday Standard this morning, the state at a loss as floods wash away costly infrastructure events. Now, the thing is, number one, we've seen a few majority, if not so, of schools having to start their second term a bit late. We saw what happened earlier this week when 2 children, about 6 of them, fell into a pit latrine in Nakuru. 2 of them were seriously injured. The rest survived with a few injuries. Other places across the country, mudslides have been happening. This is now comes at a time when the students are getting ready to go back into school for their second term. Such dates have to be postponed. One, for the sake of the security of the students as well, of the pupils. And also, number 2, how it is that we as Kenyans do not prepare adequately for rain. The weatherman told us that this was going to happen. Last year was a very dry year. We were expecting rains. But as a country, as a nation, we never prepare for the rains.
You see, it goes back, and I said here, when the president was giving his State of the Nation address, and first of all, the president gives that State of the Nation address to point out 3 issues. The programs that we have put in place in realization of our national values, and 2, the programs we have put in place in realizing the obligation to the Republic, and 3, the state of the security. The floods touches directly on the security.
Right.
And you see, when you have asked, what have we done? It's about priorities. I think we have wrong priorities when it comes to meeting such issues like floods in our country. And if we could stop our wastages and channel that money to the right purposes, I think we shouldn't be having such floods. And in 21st century, Zinzi, we should be having people being displaced, schools being marooned.
And building infrastructure on water catchment areas. That's another thing. You cannot bribe Mother Nature.
I think it's just having the wrong priorities. And you see, the problem with us, those people who are put in these institutions, when they get there, they want now to use this opportunity for selfish gains. They don't want to. We have a disaster management department in this country. They should be able to answer questions, because these things, they know them in advance.
Right.
What have they done?
All right. Quickly, let's just take a look at the Daily Nation. Of course, for them, their top story is that visit that we saw between Deputy President William Ruto, who was supposed to go visit Moi, but that did not happen. What were your thoughts on that? Because apparently it clashed with Daniel Arap Moi's medical schedule.
This was funny, because and it comes at a point where we are having handshakes, and this one I called it a bucket handshake.
Right.
And for me, I will say that three scenarios might have played out. One, it might be true because everyone is giving his side of story. It might be true that maybe the deputy president booked an appointment.
Right.
And then when they went, they found the Moi being attended to by his doctor. Two, it might have been that maybe they booked an appointment without the consent of Gideon Moi, who is a very key player.
Exactly.
And then, so when they booked out without his consent, he had to say no. Or three, Moi could have said, you can't be denigrating my son or belittling my son the whole day. Then in the evening, you want to come and say, hello.
I mean, this is what he says, and the reason why the Saturday Nation ran with this, he says why we blocked Ruto, what Moi men say. Those who want to meet Mr. Moi must ensure protocol is observed. People meet the retired president every day because there is nothing private about his life. The DP arrived at a time when Mzee was being attended to by his doctors, and for us, that was of paramount importance. Details on that specific visit and what KANU leaders had to say about it as the Deputy President William Ruto breached protocol by appearing at Kabarak unannounced for a meeting with former President Moi, but DP's supporters also claim that it's a scheme to derail their leader's march to status and vow to fight it to the bitter end. Page 4 of Saturday Nation, that's where the details are. Evans, quickly, I just wanted to get your thoughts in regards to world press freedom and how the government, because that's what was one of the things that President Uhuru Kenyatta did not touch in the State of the Nation address.
You see, it was bad during the Miguna saga, seeing and one of your news anchor, Sophia Anuna, being mistreated at the JKI. And that's not the only case. We have similar cases, and I think we need more of media freedom. We don't want less. And Kenyans have a right to information. Right. They have a right. And so the government should give the media that space. And I also think the media have the regulations that guide you on when it comes to work ethics.
All right. Thank you so much, Evans.
Thank you so much.
All right. Evans Were, who is the Assistant Relationship Manager at Emirates International Group, just helping us mince up the local dailies. So make sure you grab yourself a copy of them. Before we can jump into that specific